Let's start with this week's federal budget. The centrepiece was its Future Made in Australia policy. The government plans, as I said, to spend $22.7 billion in the next 10 years. By contrast, the United States Inflation Reduction Act is $891 billion of total spending. $240 billion of that has already been spent. China invested $890 billion last year alone in its clean energy sectors. So, can we compete? Should we compete? The Treasurer said the spending is to forge a new economy and a new generation of prosperity. But this new economic model casts, with greater government subsidy, aside the open economy and falling tariffs that were initially built by Labor giants Bob Hawke and Paul Keating. Late this week, I caught up with the man who presides over much of this new investment, Industry Minister Ed Husic.
There are a number of things I want to tackle. First, in your intro, you referred to the investments that are being made by other governments, where they are leaning in very energetically, and clearly a comparison's been made between the total amount they're putting in versus what we've just announced, and then saying that we're going against our own legacy. The reality is the world is looking at what it needs to do, and in particular, countries like ourselves in the US, to wean ourselves off concentrated supply chains, build up industrial manufacturing capability in areas that matter in the national interest, and to be able to drive future prosperity. And we're doing it in the context of the times we are in. I mean, Bob Hawke and Paul Keating made a big change at that point in time compared to what was preceding them. And so they had to move away from what others had done to recast the way in which things would occur in their day. And this is what we are doing. I'm a big believer policy should suit the times. The big challenge for us, reduce emissions, do that by mobilising Australian manufacturing capability, make the things that can help that become a reality, transition to net zero, and generate great jobs, particularly in our region, with technologies that are going to be used into the long term.
Okay, can I give you one example of where I have a question mark about what's being done? And that is the commitment of the government to manufacture solar panels here in Australia, $1 billion, when right now there is a glut of solar panels around the world, largely because of Chinese production. Why would Australia make a solar panel in this car solar panel in this country, as much as why would we make a car in this country when it is more efficient to import them and make them somewhere else?
So the assumption has to be, for that argument that you've just put to me, to put an end to what we're doing, the assumption has to be that we're doing exactly the same as what others are doing. We're producing the same product. When in fact, what Australians are doing is they're coming up with new generations, new ways of getting things done. So when we made the announcement on Solar Sunshot, we did it with a firm called SunDrive, who are doing leading edge solar tech that will change the way that solar panel is made, constructed, and importantly, and this is the big kicker here, Ross, the efficiency of their solar panel is different to the solar panels that you're talking about that form a glut right now. They are way more efficient and can produce more power with less panel. That's important, and we can do this in Australia. And we can attend to another legacy problem that's confronted this country, where Australians who invented the solar panel and saw all that go offshore because we didn't think we couldn't be buggered making the stuff here, and we shipped off our economic and jobs opportunity. This is a new form of solar panel that is also being developed at the Uni of New South Wales, and we've got an opportunity to get the economic strength and the jobs creation, if we get this right here, pairing private investment with government backing to grow this at scale on a side of a coal-fired power plant that is going to be shut down and will create more jobs through this than what was at the power plant itself. So I think that's a pretty compelling case.
Well, having been and seen sort of Zhenrong Shi, who was trained at the University of New South Wales, who was one of the great pioneers, and then taken back to China, he's with Chinese subsidies. I do understand what you're saying, but it's still the manufacturing side as to where we get our competitive advantage. I'll take you into another one. There's literally $1 billion from Queensland and the federal government that goes into PsiQuantum to try and chase quantum computing. Yeah. Now, the thing that, again, I'd say, OK, let's try and be part of that because other countries are doing the same thing. But then does that potentially crowd out funding that might otherwise have been available for other worthwhile and very good quantum computing projects here in Australia?
Number of things. One, quantum computing is going to be massive. The conventional computing with AI does so much. But even the most early people involved in physics, people like Richard Feynman said that they expect a time that you'll hit the ceiling and you can't go beyond it. And quantum computing takes us beyond there. Being able to design new medicines, improve the way energy systems work, change the way transport operates, confer big economic advantage. We have more Australians involved in quantum research per capita than most other parts of the world, but we don't have the work here to hold on to them, and they go off overseas and help other economies get strengthened. If we get this and we crack this, this will confer huge economic advantage to us. And we've got two Australians whose groundbreaking work, they couldn't get any interest here, went over to the US and are now part of one of the leading quantum computer companies on the planet, get so much private capital because they meet their milestones and beat them. And they have said to us, we want to come back home and help our own country and set up the Asia Pacific headquarters. You'd be nuts to ignore that, one. And to your point, to answer your question about crowding out investment, Daniel Petrie out of Airtree Ventures, he had that put to him, and he used a very colourful phrase in response to that suggestion, because great ideas always find the capital to back them. So when companies are ready to scale, they'll get that capital. We had our predecessors in the Liberal Party invest in silicon quantum computing. We're making this investment as a result of extensive technical, legal, commercial, probity assessment into PsiQuantum, and the National Reconstruction Fund will help back the next lot that come through. The money will be there when the ideas are ready to scale, Ross, but we need to make sure we value Australian ideas where they can be converted in a way that will give us economic and industrial muscle, and that's what we're determined to do.
OK, so I said this week to the Treasurer when he came through in the budget lockup, of the $22.7 billion being committed over the next 10 years, I said, how much is that actually cash and how much is off the balance sheet? And he made the very candid observation that a lot of it is support, like, say, for example, the $2 tax break, $2 per kilo tax break on green hydrogen. Now, there's not been a kilo of green hydrogen yet produced in Australia, so there's actually no money having to be committed by the government. Are they really just simply markers for business to be able to try and build their business cases around, as distinct from genuine amounts of money that might otherwise be committed by the federal government?
Well, bear in mind there's two things, and similar to something I touched on earlier, Ross. You've got other governments that are leaning in because they recognise they've got to reduce emissions, but they also appreciate that if they do it in a particularly good way, it'll create industry and job opportunity. And so they are extending that type of government backing to make that a reality. And they're having to lean in on that, right? And in amounts that will sound pretty big to people, but are important to be able to drive economies of scale, improve the efficiency of the technology and get it widely adopted by industry. And in terms of hydrogen, the big thing about hydrogen that doesn't get appreciated is it'll be an important part of the transition to what's known as green metals. That is, that it'll, instead of relying on, in terms of ores and burning them and the carbon footprint that comes out of steel production at the moment, we can do it in a much cleaner way. And so most steel makers are looking at hydrogen to make the transition from high emissions to lower. And getting this right's going to be important. And governments have always, the thing is, most things that we take advantage of today, Ross, have not just come out of simply private investment. They've had their gestation through investments made by governments through universities and research, backing through R&D incentives to be able to commercialise and scale, and then be taken over by the private sector. It's been an interplay between government investment and private on ingenuity and backing and capital, and being able to merge that together. So some of it, is a marker to let people know that investment can be backed by that to shave off some of the price while things get cheaper. It's part of the reason why we've got a RET. It's part of the reason why we have a Clean Energy Finance Corporation. It's part of the reason why we've got an ARENA, and that is to shave the edge off things that prevent private investment, but to bring them together to be able to drive development.
Okay, so a final one for you. The future made in Australia. But a lot of business is now saying, what about the business that is essential, that is based here and now? And one essential business I'll give you is Qenos, which takes gas and turns it into polyethylene, which is all of our plastics. Now, it might be a fairly dirty industry, but it's an essential industry if we are to have a level of self-sufficiency and sustainability. Where is the government support for those types of businesses, for companies that say, for example, make fertiliser, and I'll give you the good example of that is Orica, the biggest explosives company in the world, a user of gas. Where does the government lean into companies which do create essential industries for Australia right now?
Okay, let me just go straight to the Qenos issue. Two things. One is obviously for firms like Qenos, and I very much respect the role they play as a polymer resin manufacturer in the plastics sector. There are a lot of companies that are dependent on Qenos's products. And one of the reasons why we intervened in gas, and you heard me speak up for ages about my deep concerns about where gas prices and spot prices in particular were going and what was happening with contracts. And I make no apologies that I was pretty sharp and pointed about the way that occurred back in 2022. Our interventions were designed to start calming that market and shielding manufacturers from the worst of energy price rises, particularly when it related to gas pricing. So we've been able to make some decisions there. Now, Qenos's investors, apart from us trying to shield people or manufacturers like Qenos from that, I mean, Qenos's investors make decisions about whether or not they'll stay or go, and in this case, they've made a decision that they want to put their money elsewhere, and in different ways. And people, I mean, I can't compel in a market system. I can't tell people, no, you must retain your investment here.
I get that, but they were Chinese owners, right? I get that, but they were Chinese owners. So, who knows strategically whether it's not in China's interest for us not to be able to be self-sufficient in that product?
Well, I mean, obviously you can make that statement, but government ministers, I think, have to be very careful about just lurching in and making those type of statements. But the reality is, for me to make that direct intervention in the way that is implied in your question, I'm not saying that you're saying it that way, would mean that we'd be operating in a different type of economy. So, and I don't think that's what we're arguing, right? So people will make their calls, but fundamentally for manufacturers across the board, I've spoken up very strongly that gas companies need to be mindful of their pricing, and we don't want them to be making profit at the expense, regardless of the impact they have on the broader economy. And that's why we've had to make some interventions in the way that we've done. We've also brought in a mandatory code of conduct for wholesalers so they actually play nice and behave better and negotiate in a much fairer way when they're securing contracts with their customers, many of which are large manufacturers. And if we do need to make further changes, then we will always keep tabs on that, and we'll listen to industry on it, and we'll make changes if we have to.
Ed Husic, always good to have you on the program. We'll do it again very shortly. Many thanks for your time.
Good on you, Ross. Thank you.